us tonight for our first annual virtual winter hike. Well, I actually hope it's our last annual virtual hike, that we can do it in person again next year. But this is our first virtual winter hike. And it's been real exciting. We miss seeing everybody in the past year, and hope that we will see all of you again in the bog at the field station sooner than later. So I won't go on. I don't have too much more to say, except to let you know our administrative assistant, Danielle Bell, will be controlling sort of the chat and the screen audio, muting and so forth. I think everybody is probably muted at this particular point in time, except myself, Danielle, and Jim Reinartz. So Jim Reinartz is known to many of you, if not all of you. Hi, Jim. He is a board member of the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog, and formerly the director at the field station, UWM field station at the Cedarburg Bog. Spent many, many years working in and studying the bog, and it's a real treat to be able to do a hike with him, a virtual hike. One of the advantages maybe of the Zoom is we'll actually be able to hear him as he talks about what's happening in the bog. I've been on the hike a few times, but I've been so far back that I haven't heard all that he's had to say. So Jim, are you ready to take us out?
Yes. Danielle, are you going to talk about any specific rules or anything, or how people can chat with you? Or
yeah, so we're going to let Jim kind of talk and lead the discussion tonight, but if you have any questions, please put them into the chat, and I will, in between breaks and stuff, pop those into Jim so that he can answer those in a timely fashion, and we can kind of keep everything moving. Everybody's muted right now. If you want to turn off your video just to kind of help the bandwidth, we should be fine, but that's just a couple things. Otherwise, yeah, Jim, take it away.
Okay, like Jim said, this is our first virtual event, the bog in the winter. Thanks a lot to the Friends of Cedarburg Bog, and a lot to Danielle Bell for helping me put this together and helping with this whole process. Before we get to beautiful pictures of the bog or our actual quick virtual hike to Donut Lake that we normally take, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Cedarburg Bog and its place in the Cedar Creek watershed, and kind of key aspects of that water flow. I wanted to talk about opportunities that you can take to hike into the public parts of the bog in the winter, and I hope relate all that water flow and everything to the bog in the winter. So before we get to the beautiful pictures, let's talk about the bog. The red outline outlines our wonderful 2,200 acre wetland. The yellow line is the route that we normally take. I bet most of you have been along on the actual, as opposed to the virtual winter hike, but that's the route we usually take through the bog. The Cedarburg Bog watershed, outlined here in red, occupies the very northeastern corner of the Cedar Creek watershed. Most of the watershed of the Cedarburg Bog is actually occupied by the wetland itself, by the wetland, and the outlet stream of the Cedarburg Bog flows into Cedar Creek, which I have in a line in blue here, accented, through the Cedar Creek watershed, which flows into the Milwaukee River. And you can see that, I guess you can see my arrow here. You can see that the Jackson Marsh is in the Cedar Creek watershed, as are Cedar Lake and Little Cedar Lake, Big and Little Cedar Lakes. So the Cedarburg Bog is really a very important part of the Cedar Creek watershed, as I'll show you. In this setting of the Cedarburg Bog watershed, we have Cedar Creek to the south. The outlet stream from Mud Lake flows into Cedar Creek. And just to the east is Mole Creek, which is a tributary to the Milwaukee River. The Cedar Creek doesn't flow into, isn't tributary to the Milwaukee River until further south off this map. This is a contour map from the Ozaukee County GIS, and I'm going to show you a few of these to just make sense of the setting of the bog. This is a 1 foot contour map, but the 1 foot contour lines are in yellow, and you can almost not discern them on this map, but the darker boulder lines are 5 foot contours. So we can count up how many contours we cross and see that the Mud Lake outlet is about 45 feet higher than Cedar Creek, which is 3.2 stream miles away. That's about 14 feet per mile of fall. Not a lot of fall, but substantial. And the setting of the Cedarburg Bog itself, which is this big flat area on the contour map, or essentially flat, it's located between the north branch of Cedar Creek to the west, which is also a tributary to Cedar Creek, and Mole Creek to the east, which is tributary to the Milwaukee River. The odd thing is, and it's, I guess, odd only in the sort of glacial geology sense, or caused by the glacial geology, is that in a lot of ways it would make a lot more sense for the Cedarburg Bog to flow into Mole Creek and get to the Milwaukee River that way. And I can make sense of that if we look at just this area in the yellow box blown up a little bit. So here's the Cedarburg Bog off to the west. The spring-fed lake that's on the golf course is actually 45 feet lower in elevation, just a little over a quarter of a mile away from the edge of the Cedarburg Bog. It's 45 feet lower in elevation than the surface water level in the bog. And the surface water level in the bog is 95 feet higher than Mole Creek, which is less than a mile away. So the thing that keeps the bog from flowing to the east, where it seems like it would more naturally have the fall to flow, is this line of glacial hills that was pushed up as the glaciers receded to the east, just east of the Cedarburg Bog. So the Cedarburg Bog is perched above the local topography and the local groundwater table, and it makes a real interesting hydrology for the Cedarburg Bog. This is meant to represent a cross section of the Cedarburg Bog, which is kind of essentially a real shallow saucer kind of basin. And that whole glacial basin is lined with a clay lining that was laid down when the glaciers were still right in this area. And that clay lining is essentially the only thing that holds water in the bog on the east side. The groundwater table falls through this area from the north and the west to the south and the east, so that on the west side and the north side of the bog, the groundwater table is essentially right at the elevation of the surface water of the bog. But by the time you get to the east side, the only thing that holds water in the bog is this clay lining. We wouldn't have a wetland here if it didn't have that clay lining. What that means is that the only known really discrete springs in the Cedarburg Bog, groundwater springs, are at the north end and along the west side. If someone told me that they knew of another discrete spring in some of this area over here, I wouldn't tell them that, oh, that couldn't possibly be right, or I'd know about it. But I sure would like to know about it if there are other springs in this area. But these glacial lakes over here, also some of them have outlets that flow into the Cedarburg Bog, and I'm sure these are partially spring-fed too. And in general, It's this north and the west side of the bog that all has the potential for groundwater seepage. And groundwater does seep into that part of the bog at least seasonally when groundwater levels are high. And one indicator is if you're going to look for skunk cabbage in the Cedarburg Bog, look on the north and the west side, because skunk cabbage is a real nice indicator of groundwater seepage. And that is primarily where you find the skunk cabbage in Cedarburg Bog is in the west. The other aspect of the Cedarburg Bog that's real crucial for its hydrology and the structure of its vegetation is that it's not flat. It's not like a lake. Yes, it's a filled-in lake, but it's filled in with built-up peat. So that if you follow these contours, and I've exaggerated the 1 foot contours through this graph just to show them to you. But the bog's actually 7 feet higher at the north end than at Mud Lake and at the outlet stream. What that means is that there is a consistent, and 7 feet, I mean, that's not much. 7 feet over 2.2 miles is like 3.2 feet per mile. That's pretty dang flat, but it's not flat. And the water does flow through Cedarburg Bog consistently. It flows slowly. It takes a long time for water to get from the north end of the bog, that spring flow, to Mud Lake at the south, but it does flow. And that's what sets up our wonderful string bog area at the center of the Cedarburg Bog. The famous string bog is created by this consistent direction of water flow to the south. The basin of Cedarburg Bog is not flat. If we put a rod down through the peat and the lake sediments and find the glacial till, the clay lining essentially at the bottom, we find out that there are some deep holes. This area in here in the reds and yellows, there are some holes that are 50 feet deep in the Cedarburg Bog. These tan areas here are actually gravel islands. Most of you have been out on the field station boardwalk, and you know that the trail goes out over these 2 islands in the center of the bog. This is a real deep zone right through here, 40, 50 feet deep. But an awful lot of the bog is relatively flat with a depth of about 12 to 16 feet. So what that means is that there's flow through the bog, there's flow from north to south, and to at least, I guess, now I'm getting a little bit to how this possibly relates to the bog in winter, other than Jim just happened to want to talk about this in the winter. If we look at places where the ice is thin or perennially, consistently thin in the bog in the winter, or even non-existent, we can really learn a lot about the way the water flow tracks through the bog. We can also learn where to be careful in the bog in the winter if we're exploring, because it's pretty easy to get a wet foot in some of these places. But this is the north end of the bog, Highway 33. And you can see that there's these discrete springs up here, and there's water tracks. We do almost all our work controlling buckthorn in the bog in the winter when it's frozen, because that's when we can get in there. And I'm not going to talk at all about that today, but I just wanted to tell you that we're working in here right now. And even earlier in this winter, before there was so much snow, there is just consistently bad ice through these flow tracks through here. In fact, Danielle went up there and created a nice video and learned that you can punch through here in many places. So there's flow tracks in the north end of the bog. In the south, or the center part of the bog, the south shore of both Donut Lake and Long Lake have consistently bad or weak ice. It looks as though that water flow confined under the ice of the lakes, when it finally emerges into the peat at the south end of these water bodies, creates just enough flow so that it actually melts the ice, or doesn't allow the ice to form or melts it from underneath. And in a winter like this, where you get in a winter where there are heavy snows before really intensely cold weather, the bog will never freeze. There have been years where we've had to cancel the winter hike because there was a lot of snow and essentially no ice in the bog at all. And in a year like this, right now, the ice is actively thinning in the bog. It's not getting thicker because we have cold weather. It's getting thinner because snow is such a wonderful insulator of the wetland. And then at the south end, I'll talk about a couple of these other places later when we talk about hiking down here, but where this is an island at the north end of Mud Lake, surrounded by cattails and bulrushes, and here's an island in the lake. And where, again, where that water flow builds up at the north end of these islands, there is almost always bad ice here. You can have absolutely solid ice and you get to try to get out on the island, and that last 10 feet, you got to really pick your way through there. So again, these weak or no ice places tell us a lot about water flow in the bog. Well, now to really relate this to the hydrology of the bog in the winter, and how that relates to its really, I think, very important aspects of the bog to the hydrology and water quality of Cedar Creek and the Milwaukee River. All this snow that is in the bog, the snow and ice that's trapped in the bog over the winter, stored in the bog over the winter, is released in the spring. But it's not released quickly like water that comes off the uplands into a big surge and a flashy flow in the spring into the Milwaukee River and Cedar Creek, but it's released very slowly. And it supports that groundwater, or that base flow of high quality water in Cedar Creek and the Milwaukee River. And that slow release of this winter water and the slow release of surface water in general from the Cedarburg Bog is really important for this whole Cedar Creek watershed. Okay, I guess enough about that. If any, like we said, if any of you have any questions, chat them, if that's a verb. Chat them over to Danielle, and we can try to address them later. So before we go on our virtual winter hike in the bog, I wanted to talk just for a minute about the public hiking opportunities that there are in the bog in the winter, because other than a few trails at the north end, or canoeing or kayaking on Mud Lake in the summer, the winter is really the time to explore the bog. It's frozen, and there's no trails, but on the other hand, you can go just about anywhere in the bog if you have a compass and can find your way back out. So at the north end, we have formal trails that go into Watts Lake. There's a boardwalk through part of that goes into Watts Lake, and Watts Lake freezes up real nicely. You can get out onto Watts Lake. There's also a formal trail and a boardwalk that goes into this part that we have always called the 10-acre clearing. Used to be farmed at one point. They accessed it from a little farm road through here, which is now a very small and informal trail, but really neat nonetheless. So, I mean, if you want an adventure, go out there and find your way down there and pick your way through this little trail into all this DNR-owned land over here. I roughly put in the public land property boundaries here in this green line, and you can see that all this land at the north end is all publicly owned. There's a beautiful spring down at this southwest corner of the 10-acre clearing, which is, I don't have any good pictures of it. I should someplace, but I didn't find them for this presentation. But you should make your way into that. It's really beautiful. And some of this land down in here, in this aerial photograph, it doesn't look big, but boy, I'm telling you, you can get lost in the complexity of all the little wetland and upland areas down in this southeast part of what I'm showing on the aerial photograph in here. So it's really nice to explore this part of the wetland in the winter. Be mindful, I guess, of the places where there's perennially weak ice, but it's not much of the area really, and it's easy to avoid those. And then at the south end, the entrance to Mud Lake off of Cedar Sock Road is an access to just hundreds and hundreds of acres that you can hike forever just staying on Mud Lake and not get lost. The field station built a boardwalk into Mud Lake. But in the winter, there's not only the boardwalk into Mud Lake if there's no snow, but if there's a lot of snow, it's actually easier to take the old trail where there's no boardwalk. It's harder to walk on the boardwalk when there's a lot of snow than it is to walk where there's no boardwalk. But you get into this inlet, and where my friend Al Keltner is standing here, he's looking right out into the lake right here, out to an island in the lake. And there's a lot of wonderful exploration you can make out there. A couple notes I would make about exploring the bog in the winter. If you go out on Mud Lake, the only place in the winter where you could possibly put a foot through and break through is not out in the center part. It's at the edges. It's where the lake meets the side that you can sometimes find some weak ice. Or like I said, around this island, if you tried to get onto the island, right at the edge, you could find some weak ice. When there's slush over the top of the ice in the winter, it tends to be unnerving. You go through the snow and you hit this slush underneath, and it's kind of gives you this feeling like, uh-oh, that doesn't feel right. But the fact is, it's just the weight of the snow is pushing the ice down, and it's causing water to flow through cracks and along the edges up over the ice, but it's not thinning the ice. You still have a lot of thick ice underneath that. The one note I would make, some of you on this presentation have probably done the more adventurous trip where you get up to this part of Mud Lake and then find your way through these cattails and sedge meadow up to the stream where the field station boardwalk crosses. And from there, you actually can do the hike all the way up to Donut Lake like we normally do in the winter. But the one place that you really have to be careful, and where I would recommend having an ice chisel or a pole or something along, is right at the south end of that creek, where that creek goes into the cattails. There is almost always some bad ice right in there. And in most of the places where I say there's bad ice, like along the edge of this island here, the worst that's going to happen to you is you're going to get a wet foot. And usually you can pull your foot out so fast that you don't get wet. But this is one place at the south end of this stream here where if you're not careful, you actually could go into the ice and end up to your waist, or you get wet and it wouldn't be any fun. But it's still something you can do. Okay, so let's take our virtual hike to Donut Lake and do it kind of quickly, I think.
Do we have any questions? Nothing's come through on the chat, but if anyone has any questions right now, we could maybe put some of those together. Hopefully everybody's enjoying their chili. Got your bowl of chili and some hot cocoa.
Okay,
right.
keep going.
Keep going.
Okay, this is our quick virtual hike to Donut Lake. And this virtual hike was an actual hike just this past Wednesday. We went up through there and I'm not a great photographer, but I took a lot of pictures. And this, I didn't realize that until I was putting this together. But this is our 40th anniversary of the winter event, the winter hike, the winter event. The winter hike became a UWM field station tradition back in 1982, and we've done it every year since then. There have been years we haven't been able to go out on the bog because it hasn't been frozen, but those have been kind of few. There have been years where there was slick ice. There have been years where there were almost too many people. It is the most popular event that the Friends of Cedarburg Bog has. And at first it was just a hike, and ever since there's been the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog, there's also been the chili dinner, which is just a wonderful part of the whole event, as most of you know. So I'll do this in segments. We often take, instead of going out on the boardwalk, we take a parallel winter trail through here, which I used to maintain before I retired. I'm not sure I'll do that anymore, so we'll probably always have to go out the boardwalk from now on. But we often stop along the edge at some springs. This is a sort of dug artificial pothole spring right along the edge, which is right in here, is that pothole spring, and a natural spring that we often stop at just to look at it. Look at the open water, is just south of that area. So this is the pothole spring and the natural spring. The dog appearing on the hike is Lucy. I thought I should introduce her. So now we're gonna go from the boardwalk and go up the stream. This is what I always call the end of the stream, is right here. I feel like I can distinguish something that's a stream, even though it's not real open, up to this point. So here's our hike along the stream. From the boardwalk to what I call the stream end is 0.36 miles, and that's me. And the human in all the photos is Mr. Alan Keltner, a friend of mine. Thanks, Al, for going with me. This is the hike up the stream, pretty much headed northeast at this point. Along the stream gets to be, I don't know, it's not real open, but there's definitely a trail, a stream channel, a real subtle channel that you can follow all through this. So this is now the point at which I call the stream end right here. We go from heading northeast to heading almost due north for a ways. And so now we'll do this segment from the stream end, which is at the south end of this, up until we turn east and head straight over toward Long Lake. And you probably will recall there's a lot of going through thick strings and then open areas and then thick areas again and open areas, headed north through this area. We're in one of the open strings here. This is one of the real open areas between the strings. They're called flarks, is the name that they give to the open areas. Beautiful. There's seed. We always find seed pods of orchids and the false asphodel, a couple real relatively rare plants in through here in these real open areas. we found a really great, perfect, absolutely perfect trail of white-footed mice. I'm not a great tracker, but this is one I know for certain, because there's only one mouse we have that's active in the winter that also has a long tail. Our other voles and moles are all real short-tailed, and where the white-footed mice leaps through the snow, you can see this line that it makes where its tail drags as it goes through the snow. This little guy or girl must have gotten out and had a look up and said, okay, I don't see any hawks right now. I'm really going to give her. And just made this beeline over to here. A lot of you have probably seen places where there will be a track like this and then a big print of bird wings, and the mouse track stops at that point. But this is white-footed mouse.
Hey, Jim, I'm going to interrupt you here. We did have a question come in about the Phragmites. So I thought if you wanted to address that before you got too far.
Oh, sure. Phragmites is right in the foreground here, and is in a lot of these shots. And Phragmites australis, the giant reed grass, can be a very bad invasive species, but the invasive variety is a European variety that's been introduced to the United States. It's not the native variety. And in the Cedarburg Bog, the native variety and the invasive variety are very easy to distinguish. The native variety has real smooth stems that lose their sheaths in the winter, whereas the invasive variety is kind of ribbed. They're real easy to tell apart. And the only variety we've ever found in the Cedarburg Bog is the native variety. But having said that, it has increased dramatically in the bog in the last even in the last 20 years, it's increased dramatically, but it is native. The non-native variety is definitely a halophyte, which means it likes salt, which is why you find it so prevalent along salted roadways. And it's possible that the native variety is also likes a slight elevation in salt levels, and it's possible that road salt actually gets all the way to the center of the Cedarburg Bog, according to some geologist friends I have. So could that be the cause of this increase of the native? I don't know. The one thing that makes me a little less worried about it than the non-native is that it doesn't grow, it never grows in as thick a stand as the non-native, excluding all other vegetation. And it is native. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, we're back, still headed north through the wetland. We're still headed north at this point, but I'm looking to the east at this one real characteristic round floating island of taller trees that are in the string bog. This is the whole string bog area in here. You can see the lines of stunted cedar and tamarack trees and the flat wet areas between them. This is a spring aerial photograph, so the wet areas look real dark, and you can see the strings of trees and the wet areas in between them. And that photograph that I just showed you is looking right down this open area down here at this round island. It's kind of a landmark in that part of the string bog. Still headed north. This is obviously not taken from winter, but it's a drone, an aerial photograph from a drone that the UWM photography staff took when they were kind of playing with their drone. And it's the neatest photograph I've ever seen in terms of showing this repeated pattern of the strings. And even though there's no way that you would actually perceive the fall in slope from Long Lake down toward us to the south. Nonetheless, this photograph makes it look as though you can actually picture this fall in elevation and like a stair step across the strings, and imagine how they got formed. Okay. Still headed north through a thick string, and now we've gotten to this northern part of the trail here at the north end of this beautiful string bog area, and we're going to start headed east through these big open strings here toward a deer trail that cuts into Long Lake at the very north end. So here we're headed east. A lot of you have been on this route. And you can see that my GPS line doesn't exactly match. I think it's so cool how you can see these deer trails through this part of the bog. And this is the deer trail we're actually walking on, not where this yellow line is, but the yellow line is kind of an approximation. And you can see these deer trails. This is just, yeah, I already told you that. This is to remind me to tell you that the reason that the flat areas, the open areas look dark in here is that it's taken in the spring and they're full of water. So we're headed east through one of those flarks, and right as we come out onto Long Lake, we're greeted by some poison sumac, which incidentally, you can get poison sumac, you can contract it pretty much just as easily in the winter as you can in the summer from the bark. So if you do explore the bog, you need to make sure that you really wash yourself with Fell's Naphtha soap or Technu, any exposed skin when you get out, because if you're exploring the remote parts of the bog, it is impossible to avoid this. It looks just too much like an ash tree, even though its leafing, branching is alternate, not opposite. It's still, there's no way you're gonna tell this from every ash tree that you might encounter in the bog. Okay, this is our little trail that we take, and we come out to the very north end of Long Lake. Look at all these beautiful deer tracks. You can see that the deer pretty much, they don't have a whole lot of incentive to go out on the open water, so they skirt it in the cattails. And I think next time I go up there, I'm going to try a different way through some of this open string bog, and I'm going to see if I can find this deer trail through here. Maybe come up with a different way out into the bog. But anyway, so we're now coming out onto Long Lake. This was a deer track that actually went across the lake. I don't know why it was out there. Here's the island in Long Lake. We did not walk down around the island in Long Lake, but this is the island. So we're up here and we're looking down this way and we're seeing the edge of that island. Incidentally, Mud Lake is the most popular lake name in Wisconsin. There's 116 mud lakes in Wisconsin. One of the other very popular lake names in Wisconsin is Long Lake. There's 62 lakes named Long Lake in Wisconsin. And I used to think that that was kind of a sign of not being very creative in terms of lake names. And then I realized that that's not it at all. This is our Long Lake and this is our Mud Lake. And they're very descriptive names for our lakes. So we don't need to name them for all of Wisconsin. We got them named for us. These are just our tracks out onto the Long Lake and back. And so now we're gonna take this channel, which we've done many times, that goes up in the Donut Lake from Long Lake. This is the channel, pretty thick. It was actually easier to get through this year for the first trip than most. For some reason, the cattails weren't as thick. And now we're on Donut Lake. Our quest for all this, there's the donut hole right in front of us on the lake. And just to be able to say that we did it, we walked around it like we always do with the winter hike. So this is looking back from the donut hole, and this is Al coming back from around the island in the lake. And this is the only anterior view of Al Keltner you get on this whole thing. This is back to Long Lake and the cattail marsh at the edge of Long Lake. And now we're headed back west and headed back south. Photo on the right is my only attempt at an art shot in all this. So you can see I'm no artist with the camera. And the one on the left is just sort of another reminder that there's often slush over the top of the ice, but it doesn't really mean anything. You can see it in our prints and in the dog prints. Headed south to the stream end, headed along the stream to there. I think the boardwalk is right there. We're just about back. Yeah, here in this photograph, you can see the tall hardwood tree, deciduous trees of the island in the bog as we're headed back. And we're back to the boardwalk. The hike that we took last Saturday, so that was all a hike we took on Wednesday. A hike we took last Saturday. A couple of board members of the Friends of Cedarburg Bog, the chair of our events committee, Pam Eline, and our newsletter editor, Chuck Stabelton, went along. And Chuck's an ornithologist, and he took records of every bird he saw and reported it. It's a cool thing you can do, citizen science stuff, reported it to the bird site. I can't remember the name of it right now. eBird, thank you. But he saw, we're going to talk about these two in particular. American tree sparrows and dark-eyed juncos are two of our really cool winter birds, I think. I get excited about them, but we saw a lot of neat birds. He saw a lot of neat birds. I wasn't paying attention. And that's the trail south of the bridge down toward Mud Lake. And if you've been on the hike, you remember that by the end, you're dog tired. But you get chill. Well, she didn't get any chilly. Poor Lucy. Okay, so if we don't have any questions from that, we'll go back to, to our other talk, which for some reason this always wants to start me at the beginning, and just finish up with a few winter photos of the bog. And those of you who know me are going to be surprised that I'm not going to talk about plants and plants in the winter. You should take my two full day workshop about plants in the winter, and you'd know that I can get all crazy about that. But I'm going to talk instead mostly about vertebrates in the bog in the winter, and all the things I don't know about vertebrates in the bog in the winter. And it'd be wonderful to find out. So just a couple shots about tamarack. Tamarack, I think tamarack is more people's favorite tree than any other tree I know. But here's tamaracks along the stream in the summer. You can barely see them off in there past the cattails. In the fall, when they're just starting to turn color, and you all know there are deciduous conifer. And so in the winter, they are leafless. and beautiful. And just one of the really iconic trees of the bog. That's the tamaracks on the island in Donut Lake. And I didn't mention it before, but the place in the Cedarburg Bog, in my experience, where poison sumac is at its absolute highest density, for some reason, is around the margin of the islands in both Donut Lake and Long Lake. It is unbelievable. There's like a solid wall of poison sumac along the margins of those islands. So I want to talk a little bit about mammals, which I don't really know a whole lot about, but what the heck. There are 38 species of mammals that are known from the Cedarburg Bog area. So of those 38 species of mammals, who can we encounter in the winter? Who can we find in the winter? Well, what we're not going to find is the 6 species of bats that we have. There's 2 or 3 of them that hibernate in our area, the little brown bat, the big brown bat. The others, some of them migrate out of our area, so we're not going to see any bats. Mostly dormant in the winter are the possum and the striped skunk. Those 2 species, they're just like in a deep sleep over the winter. They wake up every once in a while, they eat a little bit of something. They're not hibernating, but you're also not going to see them a whole lot. Our true hibernators are the chipmunk, woodchuck, 13-line ground squirrel, and a mouse that actually hibernates, the meadow jumping mouse. And true hibernation, these animals right here, their heart rate will drop to a couple beats per minute, their heart rate. But the thing that I think is just absolutely amazing is their breathing rate of these species drops to 1 breath every 4 to 6 minutes while they're hibernating. And the jumping mouse in particular, tiny little mouse, goes into hibernation real early in the fall and doesn't come out until April or even May is when they emerge from hibernation. So they got to be able to put on enough stores of fat to make it through that whole winter. And then out in the wilds, we're really not going to find our house mouse and the Norway rat. They're around barns and houses. So there's 23 mammal species that are going to be active in the winter. And what I think would be a wonderful volunteer naturalist opportunity for anybody is take these 23 species and as a educational service for the Friends of Cedarburg Bog, figure out where do they live? What do they do? How do they stay warm? What do they eat in the winter? What kind of tracks do they make in the winter? Can we put together a whole set of tracks? Which ones could we actually photograph in the snow in the winter and get our own set of tracks? And I just think that would be a really neat little project, and it'd be easy to do. But I wasn't going to do all the work, so I didn't do it for this talk. Yeah, I know.
One question, Jim, while you're talking about this, someone asked, what do these status letters mean alongside the species?
I actually have that in here. The abundance codes are C is common, U is uncommon, R is rare, and P is present, but we really don't know whether they're common or rare, or we don't know much about their status. And I'm really glad you asked this question, because I am not a mammologist, and I'm going to talk next about birds, and I'm certainly not an ornithologist. So all I've done really is I've ordered and sorted and summarized the field station vertebrate species lists into what we expect to find in the winter and what I think is kind of interesting about them. But if there are parts of these lists that should be updated, the field station would be very enthusiastic about learning about that. And so that'd be another opportunity, is especially if you see something wrong with the bird list, let the ornithologists know, or better yet, work with them to update it. Because it ain't going to do no good to tell me about it. We often see otter tracks along the stream in the bog, otter tracks and otter slides, and they're real distinctive. These aren't perfect ones, but you can see places where the otter was running and sliding along through here, and just beautiful, distinct forepaw and back paw tracks of river otter. Okay, on to birds. There's 227 bird species that I think this is species that are kind of almost regular in the Cedarburg Bog area, and 62 of those species have been found here in the winter. But this is the part, I guess as a non-ornithologist, this is the part that I find kind of interesting. We only have 18 native bird species that make a home here year-round. And I don't mean there's only 18 species that can be found here year-round. I mean, the wild turkeys that hatch here live here and die here. They don't ever go anyplace else. This list of 18 species are birds that make a home here, that live here. They don't migrate someplace else for the winter or the summer. And so I feel kind of like an ornithologist in the sense that I can recognize all 18 of the birds that live in this area. But even this would be neat. You know, what do they eat in the winter? How do they survive the winter? What are their special adaptations for the winter? I think would be a really cool little project. Then we have another 22 birds that can be found here year-round, so that they're always here. But the individuals that nest here move farther south for the winter, and our winter birds come down from farther north. So these 22, if this list is correct, and I'm assuming for the purposes of this that it's right, there's these 22 birds that are migratory, but they can be here both in the winter and in the summer. So 10 of them are common in the summer, but all 22 of these species that can be here summer or winter, but migrate through, are listed as relatively uncommon or rare in the winter. So they're not real common birds here in the winter. And then there are another, I can't even read the top of my thing here, 18. There's 18 species of birds that are here only in the winter. So we don't have them in the summer. They're not permanent. We don't have them in the summer. Most of them stay farther north in most winters. So like the pine grosbeak, I have the range map here. And in most winters, it doesn't come this far south. Then there are others like the yellow-rumped warbler, which summers nests farther north than this. Most of the time it winters farther south than this, but sometimes we find them here in the winter. So they're rare here in the winter. But the ones that I think are really cool are our two real winter birds. Our American tree sparrow and the dark-eyed junco are our real winter birds. They're here every winter. It's like clockwork. Maybe the dark-eyed junco at my feeder right now in the yard, maybe it comes to my yard every winter from someplace in the far north. But it's our little winter bird, and they're just really cool. So there's only two common birds in this category. And it's the dark-eyed junco and the American tree sparrow. And on that list I showed you that Chuck Stabelton did of our hike in the bog, they both were real common on that list. He saw a lot of them. And I think it'd be, what a wonderful little project for the friends to just figure out just exactly what these do and where you find them in the winter. And I think they're both seed eaters, but it'd be neat to do a little project on that. And then finally, to wrap up here, this is the list of all of the reptiles and amphibians that we have here. And the one thing we know about these cold-blooded vertebrates, or if you want to get all fancy, our ectothermic poikilotherms, is that none of them are going to be active in the winter. I mean, we're not going to find any of these right now, but where are they? What does each of them do to survive in the winter? Some of them actually freeze, I think, freeze solid. Others get down to where they're essentially hibernating and don't freeze. I know the turtles get down to where they have a metabolism that's so slow that they can just essentially breathe underwater at low oxygen levels through their skin. But I just think that another neat opportunity to just take all of our winter reptiles and amphibians and kind of learn a little bit more about them, and summarize that. So this year it's solo, but next year, let's hope we can actually all get together again and take an actual hike rather than a virtual hike. And I hope you all can, in the meantime, just really stay safe and follow everything that's getting real hard to do, but that we know is the right thing to do, so that we can all get back together again next year. And that's all I got. Except to say, that's all I got, except to say thank you so much for so many people coming to this virtual event and doing this. I feel, and I know the friends of Cedarburg Bog feel real honored that there were so many people who were interested enough to be here for this. Thank you.